Hi, everyone, and welcome back. We are in the Leadership Lounge where we just embark on a journey for better leadership. It's not about arrival, it's definitely not about a destination. It's about evolving with the needs of the people that you serve in pursuit of that shared vision. And today I'm so excited. We have a special guest. We have an expert in her craft. We have Guerschmide. Wave to everybody, Guerschmide, and we're going to get up to her segment soon. But first, just want to introduce what we're talking about today. Today, we're talking about what the dashboard doesn't see. It's essential, but it's often overlooked. The things our accountability systems tend to not track because the truth is what's on our dashboards are the things easy to quantify, like student data, test scores, revenue, deadlines met or missed, but the slower, quieter indicators that often allow us to pivot if we're checking long before we need to, those things we don't typically check. So today we're going to start with a leadership story. Then we're going to get into some insights. Our expert is going to let us know what nugget she has to drop for us. Then we're going to play a little game. She has agreed to a game. As always, we're going to end with some practical tips. So let's get into our leadership story. We're going to talk about Sharon. Sharon is a director. She oversees multiple schools within her district. She's responsible for monitoring progress and improving practices in pursuit of strategic goals. She is values driven and highly respected by her team. Over the past several months, she's led intentional work to rebuild trust, shift team culture, and invest in relational leadership. But here's the tension. The metrics haven't moved. The dashboard is still showing average performance. The academic indicators just aren't hitting it yet. They're flat. And now she's preparing to present to the CEO, someone who historically pivots strategy quickly if the numbers don't align with the stated targets. She says, I know we're making progress, Sharon told her colleague, but I'm afraid the numbers are going to override everything. That we'll be told to pivot, not because we're off track, but because the system doesn't yet know or see what's changing. Let that sink in for a second. And here is where I'm going to invite our very special expert guest, Guerschmide. Now, Guerschmide, I've been calling you an expert because you are, but can you let the people know just what you do?
You. So right now, I am the Chief Operating Officer of a national education nonprofit. My role is, I would say that my role is unique, even though, COOs are ubiquitous at this point, but every COO has a slightly different role. Part of my role is actually organizational culture, and specifically, how do I create a culture of inclusion and belonging where everybody can thrive? And that's been my North Star since I started this work. I started at my organization as the chief operating and talent officer. And when we included finance, that's what put me in the COO seat, but I never got rid of the work culture part, which I'm grateful for. So that is the work that I do now. But, I've been a school leader. I've been a charter school authorizer. I've done a lot of work over the past 18 years trying to create equitable systems for students, but I see now most of my work being about creating great cultures for adults so that they can love what they do. They can love coming to work. Oh
So
goodness.
now, with all of that experience, let us know. Have you ever been in Sharon's shoes before? Ever?
Yes, I have. And quite honestly, I would say the time that I was in Sharon's shoes was when I was an executive director of a charter school. And I think in part this school was in a place where the academics were lagging. And so immediately the board was like, we need a new curriculum. I was brand new to the organization and I'm like, okay, the academics don't look great. Maybe we need a new curriculum. And then I actually got to meet the staff and I was like, oh, there's trauma here. And now the kids are starting to demonstrate what trauma the adults are actually going through. So it's not a new curriculum that we need, it's safety among the adults. That's where we need to go to first. And that's where I focused my energies. And I think you can imagine what it looks like to go to a board to say, I'm not going to do a new curriculum, but I'm going to spend a lot of time with staff and I'm going to help them feel better about what it means to come to work and I'm going to help them heal their trauma. And the board was like, what? So yes, I've been in Sharon's shoes.
Sometimes a lot of what we know needs to be done to many seems like fluff, seems like the stuff on the side, right? You get to that, throw that into one of your meetings, but you need to really drill home those academics. So listen, I totally resonate with that. Because some of the things that Sharon might be seeing is she's starting to see staff concerns being raised where once they would just silo amongst themselves and talk about that. She's starting to see leaders sharing what their needs are when that wasn't happening before. She's starting to see team members asking better questions. Instead of saying what's wrong, they're starting to ask questions. And she's even starting to see what some of us undervalue. She's starting to see laughter in places that it once wasn't there. Can you tell me a little bit about the importance of these things when it comes to outcomes?
So what she's experiencing is she's experiencing what could look like an increase in psychological safety. And so folks are doing this thing where they're bringing their whole selves to work. We hear about that all the time, but we don't know what that means, right? It is your ability to ask questions. Ask the question that's in your head that everybody's thinking, but you're like, ooh, is it safe for me to ask that? But going ahead and asking that, right? And why that's not a thing on the side is that when you actually create a culture where people feel safe to raise the concern and they know that their concern will not be met with retaliation, but will be met with actual change, it means that those staff members no longer are taking up any brain space thinking about all the things that's wrong with the place. You need to get to focus on the actual result, and that's why there are outcomes, which is exactly what happened, even in my story, where when we started to tend to the adults, they started to really care about what was happening with the kids because they weren't preoccupied around keeping themselves safe or creating silos or gossip. So this is not a thing on the side. I would say the reason they're starting to see the outcomes that they're seeing on these other metrics is because the culture metrics are starting to look good, even if they're not measuring them right.
That's
Right.
you only can hold but so much. And what you did was remove the things that you had control over, removing so that the professionals can be left to do the things that they know how to do, right?
That's
Without the stuff in the way. So our accountability systems hasn't not widely, excuse me, done as of now where we're collecting a lot of this qualitative information. How do you see us going about making that pivot?
Pivot happens with us being really clear about who is actually responsible for which outcomes. Here's how I would want a leader to think about this. If you're at the top of your organization, you have a leadership team, strategy team, you have a cabinet, an executive team, whatever you call yourselves. You have like these frontline people that are managing outcomes, right? They're the people that are responsible for those outcomes. I think the mistake that sometimes an executive director or CEO makes is they say, well, I'm also responsible for those outcomes. And I'm just going to push and say, not really, actually. Your team is responsible for those outcomes. It's not to say that if things don't go well, you don't have a board holding you accountable, but actually your job is to make sure that that team is having a good experience. That as a CEO, you do have accountability metrics, and those metrics should look and sound like the experience that that team is having so that they can drive the strategic outcomes of the organization.
Something brilliant that you just lifted right there, right? Because when you named that the CEO isn't necessarily directly responsible for the staff culture outcomes, I immediately kind of cringed. I'm like, let's not say that now. Let's not send that message. But I love what you did there. You said what they're directly responsible for is the experience of the team in which they're creating the culture for. Can you speak a little bit more about that? Because I think that that's too good to gloss over.
I'll give you an example of how it typically looks, and I'll use a school as an example. So, like I said, I was an executive director, and I had a principal who reported to me. And obviously, as a school, one of our outcomes is around student data. Now, My principal clearly knows that she's responsible for student data. As an executive director, I could say, well, I'm also responsible for student data. And so then what does that look like in practice? What it looks like is I'm probably stepping on her toes a lot. I'm probably getting into her lane. There aren't clear boundaries around like, who's the decision maker on this? Is it her or is it me? This is why I had to get very clear that principal, you are responsible for student outcomes. As the ED, I'm responsible for your experience. If I can create an experience where you are experiencing psychological safety, you are experiencing inclusion and belonging, you are experiencing transparency from me, you're getting a level of support that makes our relationship feel like a safe place for you to fail and rebound, you are more likely to do a good job as a principal. And the way that I explained that to my board was if we were to consider that my staff was a football team, my principal was my quarterback. I'm the head coach. And when you're watching football, you never see the head coach out on the field running the ball.
Love that.
Right?
You gotta give for the people in the back because that's good.
Yeah. So if as an ED or as a CEO, you've got the ball in your hand, you're probably not doing the right thing for your role, and you're getting in people's way. And how that looks, just to put a fine point on it, is micromanagement. You're the one that actually has the ball and you're telling people exactly what to do at every given time. And we all know that micromanagement is a clear flag that trust is not available in that space. Nobody likes to be micromanaged because that means they're not trusted.
Yeah, I like that you just made it clear because sometimes we hear I'm responsible for automatically for some of us kick us into micromanagement, right? Because you're like, let me see, let me do. But what I love that you put so clearly is that they're responsible for the experience. And right, that can trickle down. That's creating that culture of psychological safety because right now you're lifting some of the things that don't show up on our dashboard. So when we're thinking about redesigning accountability systems, what might that look like for the ED, you in this case, and the principal? How might that look different? What metrics can I start to include in my accountability systems?
So, things that I'm thinking about, I think especially because even though I was in a turnaround context, I think that these are the things you should be looking at regardless of the context you're in. Number one is employee engagement. And there are specific pieces to measure around employee engagement. And it could look a lot of different ways. There are some organizations that do net promoter score. There's some that do like the Gallup, just pick one. But essentially, some of what you want to look at are, number one, do people feel like they belong to a team? Are they clear about what their expectations are? Are they clear about how their role contributes to the larger mission and vision of the role? All of those pieces, if they're out of whack, people start to feel disengaged and like they don't really belong in that space. And I would say at a high level, some of what you want to look at are retention numbers. And I don't just mean that you have 100% retention. That wasn't my goal. My goal was, am I retaining the right people? So I was actually okay that my retention numbers, especially at first, were low because there were a couple of folks that were not the right fit, that were not the right person to be at the school that needed to leave. And so it's like, are the right people leaving and are the right people staying? And only you know what that number is given what your context is, but that is something that you should measure. And the other thing to measure in terms of their experience is the people who are staying, are they champions for the organization? And sort of measuring, this is where net promoter score is important. It's like, would I recommend somebody to work here? And if the answer is yes or no, finding out why, right, is going to be something that any ED should measure. You should become really obsessed, actually, with organizational culture and staff engagement. It should be one of your true obsessions as the leader of the organization.
And I want to make sure that we lift because you dropped something really, really valuable. And sometimes when we say redesigning, we think all new things. Let's throw it out, start over. But what you did was you took some metrics that were already tracking and you said, let's track them differently. So we're already tracking retention. Let's be really specific about within retention, who do we want to see stay and go? And what do our rates look like as far as that target versus overall retention? And what I also heard is in doing that, another metric that you lifted was, right, that net promoter score. If you have staff who are not recommending your place to others, chances are they're not as engaged as they could be. So very, very great things that you lifted there. And I wanted to stamp them because so often we think, let's start anew, when really you just were really resourceful with the metrics that you already had, right?
The last thing we need is more metrics. I don't need one more thing to measure. And I would say to add on to that is I do often get this question of adding DEI goals to our list of metrics. And I don't agree with that approach. And the reason I don't agree with that approach is because when things get hard, when the numbers start to tell you what's actually happening, you don't like what they look like, or maybe there's a funder who's like, DEI is like too hot right now, they're the first things to go. Like, let's get removed. And that can have a really chilling impact on your org culture if you've put DEI goals in place and then for whatever reason outside forces come in and now you remove them. So the approach that I take is that each goal has a component that speaks to equity, inclusion, or diversity in some way so that it's already embedded in the work that we're already doing. It's not extra work. It's not the thing that you're doing on the side. Our approach to student engagement, our approach to staff engagement, our approach to student outcomes, equity and inclusion is embedded in that approach already. And it's already going to be measured in the goal itself.
Yeah, I know that, like, I typically say what we measure tells the people what matters. So sometimes if we only see more lag measures or those end measures that we're looking at, that's what's in front of people's faces, it can feel like the other things don't matter. And what I hear you saying is be really intentional about taking those metrics because, right, they matter, lifting out of it what supports that metric. And that's what we get to track throughout. Am I hearing you correctly? So I want to make sure I get it right.
Yes, exactly. You absolutely did get it right. So, for example, if you are measuring net promoter score and you're like, we want a certain percentage of our staff to be an 8. And then within that metric, you're like, and we want 90% of our 8s to be Black women. It's not some separate thing, right? You're already measuring net promoter. Dig in a little bit, and it's like, who happen to be the people who are more likely to experience harm within the organization? Is it Black women? Okay, so now how would we write this metric to ensure that we are seeing their experience?
I love that because typically when it comes to social justice work all over, they say if you go to the most oppressed group and address them, everybody gets better.
Yeah,
Right?
everybody wins.
So we are actually going to pivot to our game. Before we do so, I want to know, is there anything else about Sharon or that you wanted to include that you're like, oh no, we can't leave until they know this?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I would say about Sharon, particularly the part where it seems to be that she has this fear that my culture is great, but the numbers are going to override everything.
Yeah.
If I were coaching Sharon, I would say, so then how do you tell the story that your culture is what's driving the numbers? It removes that fear of like, this thing is going to be talked about, but not this other thing that really matters. Really create the narrative because it's true that the reason we're making progress is because folks are experiencing safety. Folks are engaging in healthy conflict. Like there are these pieces that maybe we weren't measuring before that I believe is driving these numbers. So that's the story that I think Sharon should tell.
Yeah, controlling that narrative because I think that so many times we enter the space waiting to get the feedback right, that we don't really paint the story. And that's something that we have control over. So I really appreciate you lifting that. We're going to play a little if then scenario game. I'm going to give Gersh a statement. I'm going to say if, and then she's going to finish it off with then. If we value relational trust, then we must. And folks, hold on because I'm just going to go through these and then Gersh is going to be able to unpack any that she really resonated with. If we say equity matters, then we must stop. Okay. If leaders are the model, then they must be willing to.
publicly and
Ooh, I'm sorry. I'm gonna just put my little I'm gonna put a little ticket on that one and say, please come back to that one. If we say it's safe to fail, then
then we have to allow failure without punishment.
if we believe in transparency,
then we should share the rationale for the decisions that we make.
These are good. All right. If leaders want honest input, then what?
They need to be vulnerable.
Now I said go back and unpack the ones that resonate, but these were good. But which one do you want to start us off with?
I'll start with the one that you put a pin on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. If leaders are the model, then they must be willing to fail publicly, you said.
Yeah. And rebound.
About that. And rebound.
Yeah. So some of what I often hear people say is like, when we talk about psychological safety in particular, right? The way it's defined is kind of like, I can say the thing that needs to be said without fearing retribution, right? There are some people who don't experience that, right? But there are some people who are like, no, I can say the thing, but I don't feel safe to make a mistake. I don't feel safe to fail. And so the only way to untangle staff members from that is for leaders to model what it looks like to fail. And how do you like unpack and debrief the failure? And how do you invite people into the experience of what it looks like to rebound? So what that looks like in front of your staff is to actually admit that you made a mistake. Let's say there was a decision that you made. Maybe it was the right decision, but the wrong approach. Maybe it was the wrong decision. The outcome that we ended up getting to wasn't it. You got to say that. Just say it. And then you invite them to tell you, like, where do you think I got it wrong here? And let them actually tell you where you got it wrong. Then make a commitment to do it differently next time. Mm-hmm. And then do it differently next time. That's the rebound part. Yeah. Because now that they've seen the arc of that, of like, oh, wow, my leader was willing to tell me that they made a mistake. They're willing to tell me that they were wrong. It actually gives them permission to do the same thing with you, to say, I really stepped in it with so-and-so. And it's like, okay, what would it look like to have a conversation with them where you name that? And then you just walk through those steps with them. So if you want people to feel like they can fail, you actually have to name when you do.
I love that, because especially if you're a leader of leaders, right now you're creating that ripple effect to where now they have, like you said, they have permission to do the same, but then they're modeling that for their group. And then in our example for today, and then with students, then you get to model that for students. The freedom that you give students when that happens is really transformational. So thank you for naming that. Which other one really stuck with you?
Relational trust is a big one.
Yeah.
Leaders say all the time that, like, I really care about myself. I really value relationships, right? And the thing about being in relationship with others is that there has to be like levels of transparency, levels of trust, levels of healthy conflict. But I think where it starts is capturing and listening to the experience of staff. And I think this is particularly important when you're brand new to the organization. It can happen at any time. But if one of the first things you do is you do a listening tour, not just of asking people, well, what are the problems here, but also asking them, what's great about working here? What is something that you enjoy about working here so much that if it were to change, you would leave? You would consider leaving. Because that also tells you the thing that you shouldn't touch. But if you really do want for people to trust you, it's like you have to be willing to listen to their experience. And if there's something in their experience where you're like, that's got to change, then you've got to change it.
You got to change it. As I've said this in a previous podcast, if you're asking those questions and you're getting that feedback and you don't change it, then it's gaslighting.
Absolutely. And you know what further continues the gaslight? When you keep surveying the staff, you've got a 43% response rate, and now you're yelling at everybody like, why won't you answer the survey? Because it's a waste of time.
There you
This
go.
is this is my third year at my organization, and we've gotten 100% staff response on
Amazing.
all of the surveys because we actually change the things that they ask us to change.
See, that's the key.
That's the
That's the
key.
key. So we're actually going to move into some practical tips. And Gersh, you named a few already. I want to just restamp some of them. I want to start with, because I was talking about expanding, right? My tip that I had was to expand what gets measured. But I like your spin on it better. So I want to reword that, not say expand what gets measured. I want to say repurpose what gets measured. So we're going to start with repurposing what gets measured. And Gersh, can you please just stamp for us one more time? How do we repurpose what gets measured?
Yeah, we put it on. I think
Deeper.
what that looks like is number one, what do we currently measure and who's missing? Like whose experience is missing from this that we can add to what's getting measured in that same accountability system or in that same metric. Don't add more, but actually take what you already are measuring, deepen it. So if you've got a measure around staff retention, deepen it. Who do we want to retain? Do we want to retain?
So then, our first one, repurpose or deepen. Deepen what's already getting measured. Our second practical tip is to embed those psychological safety checks. Check often. But what Guerschmide lifted is that not only are you just checking, you have to do the thing to make the change. You have to be visible about that. Visible about that, or else, again, like we said, it's gaslighting. Do you have anything to add to that part?
Yeah, yeah, that's not a nice thing.
Yeah. And last, the last practical tip that I have is just to define what's off track. What does off track look like? Because when we get the opportunity to define what off track looks like, then it kind of reduces the anxiety around, oh, the metrics don't look exactly what I want them to look like right now. If we get to define what off track actually looks like, then we get to continue with our plan and fall into that. We see psychological safety. We can keep building that without pivoting because we understand, we have an institutional understanding of what off track looks like. Gershman, anything to add to that?
That was beautiful. I love that. The other thing I would add is if the metric that's off track is not necessarily an org culture piece, dig in a little bit because maybe there's an org culture reason that that metric is off track. Ask questions, like really ask people why they think that metric is going off track, and you'd be surprised to hear how much of it is not about the work itself, but about how we engage in the work.
Right? What we're experiencing, like you
What we're
lifted
experiencing.
earlier. Because remember, this episode is what the dashboard doesn't see. Okay, so Gershman has been really intentional about reminding us that we need to go deeper versus, right, add more. Adding more is cumbersome, but going deeper and be more intentional, that allows us to get to that root. So we're not just solving, but we're not just here attending to symptoms. We're getting to that root cause. I want us to give a tremendous thank you to Guerschmide. You have been a fantastic guest. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. Do you have any last words before we close out?
Thank you so much for having me. This was such a great conversation. I always enjoy spending time with you. So thank you.
Likewise. If this episode resonates with you, please share it. Say, save it, share it, but most importantly, sit with it. Sit with it and see how it can move your practice starting tomorrow. Until next time, when we see you in the Leadership Lounge, please remember leadership is not about arrival, it's not about destination. It's a journey. So embrace the journey, and we thank you so much for including us in your journey. Till next time.